All right, listen up, because this is one of those moments that could flip the switch for you. You've been chasing someone who pulls away every time you get close. You give more, they give less. You show up, they shut down. And you've been stuck in this loop, thinking maybe if I just try harder, love harder, wait longer. No, that ends now. Because the second you stop chasing an avoidant, everything changes. Not just in the relationship, but in you. This isn't about them anymore. This is about reclaiming your power, your peace, and your damn self-worth. Let's talk about what really happens when you stop running after someone who's been emotionally unavailable from day one. When you stop chasing an avoidant, the first and most important thing that happens is the power dynamic shifts, and it shifts fast. For so long, the avoidant partner has held the emotional upper hand. They dictate the rhythm of connection and distance, engagement and withdrawal. They text when they feel like it, show affection only when it's comfortable for them, and often leave you second-guessing your worth. And you, in response, keep trying harder, trying to decode their silence, soften their coldness, and prove that you're safe enough for them to open up. It's exhausting, isn't it? But here's the truth, that imbalance only exists as long as you play into it. When you stop chasing, you're no longer feeding the cycle. You're no longer handing over your energy, attention, and emotional resources to someone who treats connection like a threat. You shift the center of gravity away from them and back to yourself. That's what we mean by a power shift. It's not about control or manipulation. It's about reclaiming the authority over your own emotional experience. Avoidant individuals, whether consciously or not, thrive in situations where they don't have to emotionally invest too deeply. The more you chase, the more they distance themselves, because your pursuit validates their fear that closeness equals loss of independence, or vulnerability equals danger. When you pull back, you remove the pressure they've been reacting to, but more importantly, you stop validating their behavior. You stop telling them through your actions that it's okay to keep you at arm's length while still benefiting from your presence. And something interesting happens here. Once you stop over-functioning in the relationship, the avoidant person is forced to confront the emptiness they've created by pushing you away. If there was ever a chance of emotional growth on their end, this is where it begins, but that's not even the point. The point is, you're no longer waiting for it. You're not holding out hope for a breakthrough. You're not sacrificing your own peace while someone else works through their issue. That's the power shift from external fixation to internal alignment. It's in this moment of stepping back that you realize you've been giving your power away, not just to them, but to the entire dynamic. Every anxious thought, every maybe they'll change, every desperate attempt to reconnect after silence, it all took from you. And when you stop, when you really stop, you reclaim everything that you were pouring into a one-sided connection. Your self-worth starts to rise, not because someone else finally validated it, but because you did. You said enough. You chose yourself, and that choice echoes louder than any words ever could. The shift doesn't always feel empowering at first. It might feel like grief. You might feel the weight of emotional withdrawal, the absence of someone you desperately wanted to stay. But in that silence and that stillness, you start to hear you again. You realize how much of your energy was wrapped up in trying to win love from someone who was never ready to give it. And that realization, that's where the real power kicks in. It's not just about breaking a toxic pattern, it's about waking up. You begin to see the bigger picture, how this dynamic mirrors old wounds, how you've been trying to earn love instead of recognizing you never had to in the first place. You start noticing your own capacity for love, commitment, and emotional depth, and how it deserves to be met, not minimized. And the more you sit in that awareness, the more your standards begin to rise. You're no longer interested in convincing someone to choose you. You're focused on choosing yourself every single day. The avoidant may notice the shift. They might come back around, sensing the loss of your energy. But now you see things clearly. You're no longer flattered by crumbs. You're not waiting by the phone for intermittent affection, because you've tasted what it feels like to hold your own power, and there's no going back. This power shift is the beginning of everything. It's the line in the sand. It's not just about walking away from a person. It's walking away from a version of yourself that settled for emotional scraps. And as painful as that can be, it's also liberating, because for the first time in a long time, you're not chasing love. You're becoming it for yourself. And when that happens, the whole game changes. When you stop chasing an avoidant, one of the first things that sets in after the initial emotional withdrawal is clarity, real, unfiltered clarity. For so long, you've been caught in a haze of hope, confusion, and emotional noise. You're constantly analyzing their words, interpreting their silences, and trying to make sense of a connection that never quite feels secure. It's like being in a fog where everything is just blurry enough to keep you stuck, constantly second-guessing yourself. You convince yourself that if you just say the right thing, or become more patient or more understanding, they'll finally see your worth and choose you fully. But they don't, and that inconsistency keeps you hooked. Once you stop chasing, the fog begins to lift. The clarity doesn't come all at once. It creeps in slowly in the quiet moments when you're no longer anxiously waiting for their attention or dissecting their mixed signals. You start to see the relationship, or whatever it was, for what it actually is, not what you hoped it could be. That's a hard pill to swallow. But it's also the most liberating thing that can happen. Without the constant emotional stimulation of the chase, waiting for a reply, overanalyzing their mood, walking on eggshells to avoid pushing them away, you finally get the mental space to reflect with honesty. You realize how much of your energy was spent trying to earn something that should have been mutual. You see all the moments you excuse their distance, their lack of emotional availability, their failure to show up for you in the ways you needed. And in seeing those things clearly, you begin to accept something powerful. It wasn't about you not being enough. It was about them not being capable or willing of meeting you where you are. Clarity helps you draw a line between love and attachment. It reveals how much of your investment was driven by your own emotional patterns, maybe even childhood wounds or past traumas that taught you love must be pursued, earned, or proved. When you stop chasing, you start seeing yourself with new eyes too. You recognize how often you minimized your needs just to maintain a connection. You remember the times you told yourself, maybe this is just how relationships are, or maybe I'm asking for too much, when deep down you knew what you were feeling wasn't right. The silence that comes after you stop chasing is uncomfortable, yes, but it's also illuminating. It becomes a mirror that reflects truth instead of fantasy. Sometimes this clarity can feel brutal. You might start to see just how emotionally unavailable they really were, how they breadcrumbed affection just enough to keep you hoping, how they used space as a way to maintain control without taking real responsibility for the relationship. You'll remember the times you opened up only to be met with coldness or detachment. It hurts, but pain doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're finally telling yourself the truth. And once you know the truth, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending that their lack of emotional intimacy is something you just have to accept. Clarity makes you realize you were not in a relationship. You were in a loop where your effort did all the work, where your emotional labor kept something going that should have ended long ago. And it's not about blaming them or villainizing anyone. It's about understanding the emotional reality of the situation so you can finally choose peace over pursuit. That kind of clarity is where healing starts. It's what allows you to stop asking what you did wrong and start asking why you accepted so little. It's what helps you separate your worth from their inability to connect. Because you begin to understand that someone who avoids closeness, who shuts down in the face of intimacy, is not in a position to love you in the way you need to be loved. And no amount of trying harder will ever change that. What's even more powerful is that this clarity stays with you. It starts to shape how you show up in future relationships. You'll recognize the red flags sooner. You'll feel the energy shift when someone starts to pull away emotionally, and this time you won't chase. You'll pause, observe, and protect your peace. Because you've seen what happens when you ignore the signs. You've lived it, and you've outgrown it. Clarity doesn't just show you what was wrong, it also reveals what's right for you. It reminds you of what it feels like to have mental and emotional stillness, to not be in a constant state of waiting and hoping. It gives you space to reconnect with your own voice, your needs, your standards. And once you've had a taste of that kind of alignment, the chaos of chasing someone emotionally unavailable no longer holds the same appeal. Relax. So when you stop chasing and the fog lifts, don't run from the truth that begins to surface. Let it sit. Let it teach you. Because this kind of clarity, while painful at first, is the beginning of true emotional freedom. It's how you stop breaking your own heart. It's how you start living from a place of self-respect instead of self-sacrifice. And that shift is everything. Rebuilding self-respect after chasing an avoidant partner is one of the most transformative parts of the healing process. When you're caught up in a dynamic where you're always reaching, always initiating, and constantly trying to decode mixed signals, your sense of self-worth takes hit after hit. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow and subtle. At first, it feels like patience. Then it feels like understanding. But eventually, what you're really doing is compromising your own value, shrinking yourself to maintain a bond that's barely holding together. You tell yourself that love means sacrifice, but what you're really doing is sacrificing you. And the longer you chase, the further away you drift from the person you were before it all started. So when you stop chasing, there's a strange silence that follows. At first, it might feel like emptiness, like you've lost something. But very quickly, that emptiness starts to turn into space. And in that space, you begin to hear the parts of yourself that were quiet for too long, the parts that knew you deserved more, that felt the misalignment, that cried when you had to pretend you were okay with their distance. Those parts begin to rise. Rebuilding self-respect starts with listening to them, not silencing them. You start remembering your value, not in a loud performative way, but in a quiet, powerful knowing. You remember what it feels like to feel grounded, emotionally safe, and heard. You realize that love isn't meant to feel like chase. It's not meant to be earned or negotiated or fought for endlessly. And you begin to question why you ever accepted anything less. This questioning is a crucial part of rebuilding self-respect because it helps you draw a line between what you want and what you were settling for. It helps you stop personalizing someone else's emotional unavailability and start owning your role in staying too long, hoping too hard, and compromising too deeply. What's powerful is that self-respect doesn't come back all at once. It builds with every small decision you make in your favor. It's in the choice to not respond to that late-night text from someone who only shows up on their terms. It's in the decision to walk away instead of justifying their cold behavior again. It's in the moments you stand in front of the mirror and remind yourself that you deserve to be loved with presence, not absence. And it's in the boundaries you start to set not to punish anyone, but to protect your peace. Rebuilding self-respect also means taking responsibility, not for their behavior, but for your healing. It means looking inward and asking why you tolerated emotional starvation for so long. That's not about blame. It's about understanding. Maybe you were raised to believe that love means working hard to be chosen. Maybe you're used to people being hot and cold, and that unpredictability feels familiar. Maybe deep down, you didn't believe you were worthy of consistent, steady, nurturing love. Whatever the reason, self-respect begins when you no longer allow those beliefs to drive your choices. And the beautiful thing is, once you start choosing yourself, you start attracting differently. You no longer feel magnetized to people who mirror your wounds. You begin to crave stability instead of intensity. You seek emotional safety, not just chemistry. You value peace over passion that leaves you feeling anxious and insecure. Because you've tasted the cost of abandoning yourself and you're no longer willing to pay that price. Self-respect also redefines what love looks like for you. You begin to understand that love is not about chasing. It's about mutuality. It's about someone who chooses you back consistently, without fear, without games. You stop confusing distance with depth, silence with mystery, and intensity with intimacy. You start expecting effort, honesty, and emotional presence. And anything less becomes an automatic no. That's not ego. That's alignment. That's growth. You also stop apologizing for your needs. You stop shrinking to fit into someone else's limitations. You realize that your emotional needs aren't too much. They were just too much for someone who wasn't ready to meet them. And you stop blaming yourself for that. You begin to see your sensitivity, your loyalty, your desire for connection, not as weaknesses, but as strengths that need to be cherished, not exploited. And you promise yourself that you'll never again stay where you have to beg for the bare minimum. This is what rebuilding self-respect looks like. It's quiet. It's daily. It's deeply personal. It's in how you talk to yourself, how you care for yourself, and how you protect your energy. It's not about being guarded. It's about being intentional. You're no longer open to everything. You're open to what matches your values, your growth, and your emotional capacity. In the end, walking away from chasing an avoidant isn't just about ending a painful relationship. It's about choosing to never abandon yourself again. It's about building a life where your worth isn't up for debate. And once you get there, once you feel that kind of inner strength, you'll look back and wonder why you ever thought that chasing someone who couldn't meet you was the definition of love. You'll know now, love starts with you. Respect starts with you. And from now on, you are your safest place to come home to. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood. People think it means shutting down, going cold, or pretending not to care. But real emotional detachment is none of those things. It's not about becoming numb. It's about becoming free. It's what happens when you stop tying your emotional well-being to someone else's inconsistent behavior. It's what happens when you decide that your peace is more valuable than their unpredictability. And when you've been chasing an avoidant partner, emotional detachment becomes one of the most powerful shifts you can make. Not just to end the cycle, but to reclaim your inner stability. At first, it feels impossible. You've spent so much time emotionally invested in someone who rarely met you halfway. Your feelings were real, your hope was real, and the connection you felt, no matter how inconsistent, left an imprint. So the idea of detaching emotionally can feel like betrayal, like giving up on something you deeply wanted to work. But over time, you begin to realize that the only thing you're really giving up is the pain of trying to hold on to something that's never been in your control. The process of detaching starts with awareness. You begin to see the pattern clearly, how you react every time they pull away, how you go into overdrive trying to reconnect, how their distance triggers your anxiety and keeps you stuck in a loop of proving, pleasing, and waiting. Once you recognize that this pattern isn't love, it's survival, you start to question why you've been participating in it for so long. That's the first sign of emotional detachment. You stop reacting, you stop chasing, you stop feeding the cycle with your energy. And when you stop reacting, something inside you settles. It's not that you stop caring overnight. It's that you begin to care about yourself more than the illusion of a relationship that was never emotionally safe to begin with. Detachment isn't about bitterness. It's about boundaries. It's about saying, I can love someone and still choose myself when that love becomes destructive. That's a level of emotional maturity that often comes only after deep hurt. But once you get there, it's life-changing. The most surprising part of detaching is the silence, the mental and emotional noise that once filled your days overthinking their words, replaying conversations, wondering what you did wrong begins to fade. And in that quiet, you start to breathe again. You start to feel the weight lifting. There's a lightness that comes with not being emotionally tied to someone who constantly triggered your insecurity. You start showing up differently for yourself. You have more mental space, more emotional energy, more clarity about what you actually want from a relationship. With emotional detachment also comes perspective. You begin to see that the avoidant person's behavior wasn't about you. Their inability to be present, to commit, to open up, that was their emotional wall, not a reflection of your worth. You stop internalizing their avoidance as a rejection. You stop taking their silence personally. Instead of asking, why don't they want me? You start asking, why did I stay so long trying to convince them? And that question shifts everything. Detaching emotionally doesn't mean you didn't love them. It means you love yourself enough to stop hurting for someone who refuses to meet you where you are. It means you're no longer available for half effort, for hot and cold affection, for confusion dressed up as chemistry. You're not punishing them, you're protecting your peace. You're not closing your heart, you're redirecting it towards something healthier. Another key part of detachment is learning how to hold your own emotional experience without outsourcing it to someone else. You stop needing their attention to feel validated. You stop needing their response to feel seen. You learn to sit with your feelings, process them, and move through them on your own terms. That emotional independence is a powerful form of self-trust. You're no longer controlled by someone else's presence or absence. You're no longer living in reaction mode. And eventually, detachment becomes your default, not in a guarded way, but in a grounded way. You become more discerning with who you give your energy to. You can still connect deeply, still love fully, but now you do it with awareness. You don't chase, you don't overextend, you don't abandon yourself for the sake of a connection, because you've learned that any relationship that requires you to give up your peace isn't worth keeping. What emotional detachment really gives you is freedom. Freedom from emotional chaos, freedom from trying to fix someone who never asked to be fixed, freedom from tying your value to someone else's ability to love you properly. And that freedom, that's where healing begins. That's where you rebuild your life, not around someone else, but around your own wholeness. You realize you're allowed to walk away from anything that hurts. No matter how much you once wanted it, you're allowed to release someone, not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself more. And you're allowed to find peace, not in someone coming back, but in never needing them to come back in the first place. Emotional detachment is the bridge between surviving a toxic dynamic and thriving on your own terms. It's the quiet, powerful decision to stop chasing and start choosing yourself every single day. One of the most unexpected gifts of stopping the chase is the quiet rediscovery of your own peace. When you've been involved with someone who is emotionally avoidant, peace becomes a foreign concept. You don't even realize how much anxiety you've normalized, how constant the emotional tension has been, until it's gone. You live in a state of anticipation, always wondering if they'll show up this time, if they'll pull away again, if you've said too much or not enough. Your nervous system never really gets to rest. You're wired into their rhythm, always adjusting, always waiting for stability that never comes. But the moment you stop chasing is the moment the noise begins to quiet. There's a sudden stillness, not just on the outside, but inside your own mind. And at first, it can feel unsettling. You're so used to the emotional ups and downs, the intensity, the longing, the highs and lows, that peace feels boring, foreign. You might even mistake it for loneliness, but it's not. It's the detox from the emotional roller coaster. And as the days go by, you begin to realize something profound. You feel lighter, not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer fighting to be loved by someone who resists closeness. In that space, you start to feel your own energy returning to you. The energy you used to spend analyzing their texts, worrying about their mood swings, rehearsing conversations, and trying to decode mixed signals is now yours again. And with that energy comes calm. Not the fake calm that comes from temporary reassurance, but real grounded calm. The kind that comes from not having to constantly second-guess yourself or explain away someone else's emotional absence. This peace doesn't come in a dramatic moment. It sneaks in quietly, often unnoticed. It's in the morning, you wake up and don't immediately check your phone for their message. It's in the evening, when you realize you haven't thought about what they're doing or who they're with. It's in the conversation with a friend where you laugh without the weight of heartbreak sitting on your chest. Slowly, bit by bit, you return to yourself. Peace looks like sleeping through the night because your brain isn't in hyperdrive. It looks like making plans without waiting to see if they'll suddenly reach out. It looks like joy that isn't dependent on someone else's mood or attention. And eventually it becomes your new baseline. You start to protect it. You become more aware of what disrupts it. You start filtering people not by how intensely they make you feel, but by how safe, seen, and steady you feel in their presence. That's the shift. You begin to prioritize peace over passion that burns you out. You start to crave emotional consistency instead of the thrill of uncertainty. You stop confusing anxiety with excitement. And in doing so, you rewrite what love means to you. You no longer believe love should hurt. You no longer believe you have to earn it. You begin to see that healthy love feels like peace, not because it's boring, but because it allows your nervous system to breathe, your mind to rest, and your heart to feel safe. With peace also comes clarity. You're no longer caught up in the mental gymnastics of trying to figure someone out. You see things as they are, not as you wish they were. You recognize your own patterns without judgment. You start to understand what drove you to chase someone emotionally unavailable in the first place. And instead of blaming yourself, you offer yourself compassion. Because now you know better. And with that knowledge comes power, the power to choose differently, to love differently, to live differently. You realize that peace is not just a feeling, it's a boundary. It's a decision you make every time you refuse to engage in something that depletes you. It's in saying no to dynamics that create confusion. It's in walking away from conversations that leave you doubting your worth. It's in trusting your gut when it tells you that something doesn't feel right, even if your heart wants it to work. Peace becomes your compass. And once you've felt it, you won't trade it for chaos again. This kind of peace isn't flashy or loud. It's subtle. It's the kind of thing you don't always notice until someone tries to take it from you. And then you defend it fiercely. Because now you know what it's like to live without it, and you never want to go back. You don't need constant reassurance anymore because you've built a life that feels whole without someone else filling the gaps. You don't need emotional drama to feel alive because your peace is now your power. And eventually, you stop looking back. Not because you don't remember what you went through, but because you've outgrown it. You've created something better, something quieter, deeper, and more sustainable. You've learned to value the kind of love that doesn't make you chase, the kind that doesn't hurt, the kind that begins with you. Peace is no longer a reward you hope someone will give you. It's the standard you set, the space you live in, and the energy you refuse to lose again. When you stop chasing and avoid it, you don't just walk away from someone who couldn't meet you. You walk back home to yourself. You reclaim your self-respect, your emotional balance, and your inner peace. You stop tying your worth to someone else's inability to show up, and you start remembering that love is not meant to be begged for. It's meant to be mutual. The silence they leave behind becomes space for your healing. The stillness becomes strength, and the absence of their chaos reveals the clarity you were missing all along. This journey isn't about bitterness or blame. It's about awakening. It's about realizing that you are not too much. You are just trying to fit into someone's emotional limits. And now you're done with shrinking. You're done with waiting. You're done with chasing. Because the version of you that knows your worth, honors your peace, and chooses your own damn self every time, that version of you is finally in charge. And she doesn't chase. She attracts. She decides. She rises.